Chapter 1. The sound that changes everything. There are moments in every story where the universe holds its breath, waiting to see which path will be chosen. In The Walking Dead, we've seen so many of these crossroads, decisions that ripple forward through time, changing everything that follows. But what if one of the most heartbreaking moments in the series had unfolded differently? What if the desperate search for Sophia Pelletier hadn't ended in tragedy, but in the kind of miracle that redefines what survival means? Let's step into that possibility, into a world where instinct matters more than assumption, where paying attention to the small details can change everything. It's day 5 of the search for Sophia at Herschel's farm. The autumn air carries that crisp promise of winter, and Daryl Dixon emerges from the tree line, looking like he's been through a war. Blood streaks down his temple from where a branch caught him during another fruitless expedition into the woods surrounding the Green property. His crossbow hangs heavy in his grip, and there's mud caked on his boots from creek beds and hollow logs where a 12-year-old girl might have tried to hide. But Daryl isn't just tired, he's beginning to carry that particular weight that comes from hope stretched too thin. Carol's face flashes in his mind, the way she looked this morning when he promised he'd find something, anything, that might tell them what happened to her daughter. 5 days of following deer trails and checking abandoned cars, 5 days of calling Sophia's name into forests that only echo back silence. He should head straight back to camp, should report another dead end to Rick, should watch Carol's face crumple just a little bit more, should accept what everyone else is starting to believe, that maybe this search has gone on long enough. But Daryl Dixon has never been good at accepting what everyone else believes. As he approaches the farm buildings, something catches his attention. Not a sound, exactly, but a pattern. Movement around the old red barn that doesn't quite make sense. He's learned to read walker behavior over these months, since the world ended. How they cluster around noise, how they follow scent trails, how they move with that distinctive, shambling rhythm. But the few walkers he can see near the barn aren't behaving normally. They're pacing. Not the aimless wandering he's used to, but something more focused, like they're responding to something specific. Daryl pauses at the edge of the farmyard, studying the scene with the same intensity he'd used to track deer. The walkers aren't trying to get into the barn. They're already at the barn, but they're not trying to get out either. They're just there, restless in a way that suggests they're reacting to stimulus he can't see. Something's not right. Every survival instinct he's developed since childhood, every lesson learned from his father's harsh teachings and his brother's reckless courage, tells him to investigate. Not to assume, not to accept the obvious explanation, but to look closer. He circles wide around the barn, keeping to the shadows of the old oak trees that dot the Green property. This is what Daryl does best, what he's always done best: observe without being observed. The walkers at the front of the barn don't notice him as he moves to the back side of the structure, where the weathered boards have begun to warp and separate with age. And that's when he hears it. A sound so quiet, so human, that at first he thinks he's imagining it. A small cough, muffled and weak, coming from inside the barn. Daryl freezes, crossbow raised, every nerve ending suddenly on high alert. Because that wasn't a walker sound. Walkers don't cough. They moan, they growl. They make that distinctive clicking sound when their jaws work. But they don't cough like someone trying to muffle the sound, like someone who knows that making noise could mean death, like someone who's still alive. His hands are surprisingly steady as he approaches the loose board he'd noticed, a gap in the barn's wall just wide enough to peer through. The afternoon light streaming through creates shadows and patterns inside the barn that take his eyes a moment to adjust to. But when they do, what he sees stops his heart completely. There, in the loft space above the main floor of the barn, pressed back against the far wall and partially hidden behind old hay bales, is a small figure, a girl with tangled blonde hair and clothes torn and dirty from days of hiding, a girl whose face he recognizes from the photograph Carol carries in her back pocket. Sophia Pelletier, alive. She's weak, he can see that immediately. Her movements are slow and careful, like someone conserving energy they can't afford to waste. But her eyes are alert, and when she shifts position, it's with the deliberate caution of someone who's learned to survive by being invisible. For a moment, Daryl can't move, can't breathe. The implications hit him like a physical blow. Sophia is alive. She's been alive this whole time, hiding in Herschel's barn while they've scoured every inch of the surrounding countryside. While Carol has been falling apart with grief and guilt, while the group has been debating whether to keep searching or move on. Sophia has been here, 20 yards from where they sleep every night. But as his mind starts working again, he realizes the situation is far more complicated than just a miraculous reunion. Because now, he can see what Sophia sees from her hiding place in the loft. Below her, scattered across the barn floor, are at least a dozen walkers, moaning, shuffling, completely unaware of the living girl hiding above them. She's trapped, and worse, she's been trapped for days, staying alive through sheer will and whatever survival instincts a 12-year-old can muster in a world gone insane. Daryl moves carefully to get a better angle through the gap in the boards, trying to understand how this is possible. How did she get into the loft? How has she stayed quiet enough to avoid detection? What has she been eating, drinking? And most importantly, how long can she hold on? As if sensing his presence, Sophia's head turned slightly toward his position. For a heart-stopping moment, their eyes meet through the gap in the barn wall. He watches recognition dawn in her face, watches her mouth form a single, silent word. Daryl. It's barely a whisper, but in that moment, it's the most important sound he's ever heard, because it tells him everything he needs to know. Sophia Pelletier is alive. She's survived impossible circumstances, and she's trusting him to figure out how to save her. Daryl presses his face closer to the gap, making sure she can see him clearly. He raises one finger to his lips in the universal gesture for silence, then points to his eyes, and then to the walkers below. She nods, understanding immediately. This girl has learned things in the past 5 days that no child should ever have to learn. But she's learned them. She's survived. And now it's up to him to make sure that survival matters. Daryl moves back from the barn wall, his mind already racing through possibilities. He can't just charge in. The noise would alert the walkers and likely get Sophia killed. He can't call for help. Too many people would mean too much chaos, too much risk of someone making a mistake. This requires precision, planning, and most of all, it requires keeping this secret until he can figure out exactly how to handle it. As he retreats to the tree line to think, Daryl allows himself one moment of pure, overwhelming relief. The search isn't over. The nightmare that's been consuming Carol isn't real. Sophia Pelletier is alive, and he's going to find a way to bring her home. But first, he needs a plan. Because saving someone from a barn full of walkers isn't just about courage. It's about being smart enough to make sure the rescue doesn't become another tragedy. The universe has given them a second chance. Now it's up to Daryl to make sure they don't waste it. Chapter 2. The Secret Alliance. The weight of a secret can be measured in different ways. Sometimes it's the burden of keeping something hidden that crushes you. But sometimes, in the rarest, most precious moments, it's the weight of hope that you're afraid to trust. The possibility that everything might actually work out if you can just be careful enough, smart enough, patient enough to see it through. Daryl Dixon has never been good with secrets, but he's about to learn that some secrets are worth becoming good at. It's been 3 hours since he discovered Sophia in the barn loft. 3 hours of sitting in his tent, cleaning his crossbow for the 4th time, trying to think through every angle of what comes next. Because this isn't just about getting one girl out of a barn. It's about doing it without getting her killed, without exposing whatever Herschel's hiding, and without tearing apart the fragile peace their group has found on this farm. The afternoon sun is starting to slant lower through the oak trees when Daryl makes his move. He's assembled what he hopes is enough supplies: a water bottle, some jerky, a few pieces of fruit from Herschel's trees, and antibiotics he's quietly lifted from their medical supplies. Nothing that will be missed immediately, but enough to keep Sophia going until he can figure out a real plan. The barn stands quiet in the golden light, the walkers having settled into their afternoon stupor. Daryl has been watching their patterns, and he's noticed they're less active during the heat of the day. It's a small window, but it might be enough. He approaches the back wall of the barn with practiced stealth, every movement calculated to avoid detection. The loose board creaks slightly as he works it free, but the sound is muffled by the general groaning and shuffling from inside. When he peers through the gap, Sophia is exactly where he left her, pressed back against the far wall of the loft. Their eyes meet, and this time she's ready for him. She's moved closer to the edge of the loft space, positioning herself where she can see him clearly without exposing herself to the walkers below. There's something different about her face now, less of the desperate hope from their first contact, and more of the calculating wariness that comes from days of staying alive by thinking every decision through. Daryl carefully pushes the water bottle through the gap, followed by the food. He watches Sophia's eyes widen as she sees the supplies, and the way her hands shake slightly as she reaches for the water. She's been rationing whatever she had, probably down to drops of moisture from the barn roof, and whatever small creatures she could catch in the loft space. But even as she drinks, she keeps her movements controlled, quiet. This girl has learned lessons that go far beyond her 12 years. When she's finished drinking, Sophia moves closer to the wall, positioning herself where she can whisper, without the sound carrying to the walkers below. Her voice is barely audible, but in the afternoon stillness, Daryl can make out every word. "How long have you been looking for me?" The question hits him harder than he expected, because the answer is 5 days, but it feels like forever. 5 days of Carol's face getting more hollow, of Rick's leadership being questioned, of the group starting to fracture over whether to keep searching or move on. "Since you went missing," he whispers back. "Your mama. She ain't given up. None of us have." Sophia nods, and he can see her processing this information. "I heard voices sometimes, calling my name. I wanted to answer, but..." She gestures toward the floor below, where the soft moaning of walkers provides a constant, chilling soundtrack. "You did right," Daryl tells her. "Smart girl staying quiet." "I've been watching them," Sophia continues, her voice taking on an intensity that surprises him. "The dead ones, they have patterns. They're more active when it's cool, less when it's hot. They respond to sound more than smell, I think. And they don't look up much. They follow movement at ground level. Daryl stares at her through the gap in the boards. In 5 days, this 12-year-old has conducted her own study of walker behavior from the perfect observation post. She's survived not just through luck, but through intelligence and careful observation. The revelation changes everything about how he's been thinking about this rescue. "How long you been up there?" he asks. "Since the first day. I was running from those things in the woods, and I saw this barn. I thought maybe I could hide inside, but when I got here, it was full of them. I climbed up to the loft to get away, and then I couldn't get back down. But I found some old horse blankets up here, and there's water that drips through the roof when it rains." The picture she's painting is both heartbreaking and remarkable. 5 days of survival in a space barely large enough to lie down in, surrounded by the constant threat of discovery and death. But she's not just survived. She's learned, adapted, turned her prison into an observation post. "We're going to get you out," Daryl promises. "But it's going to take some planning. You keep doing what you've been doing. Stay quiet, stay hidden. I'll be back tonight with more supplies, and we'll figure out the rest." Sophia nods, but there's something in her expression that makes him pause. "There's something else," she whispers. "The man who lives here, the old one with the beard. He comes to the barn sometimes. He talks to them like they're people, like they're his family." This stops Daryl cold, because he's been wondering how walkers ended up in Herschel's barn, and now Sophia has given him a piece of the puzzle that makes everything more complicated. If Herschel is keeping walkers in his barn intentionally, if he sees them as family rather than threats, then any rescue attempt becomes infinitely more delicate. "You keep that to yourself for now," he tells her. "Don't matter what the old man thinks. We're getting you out." As Daryl prepares to leave, he knows he can't handle this alone. The logistics are too complex, the risks too high. He needs help, but he needs help from someone who can be trusted absolutely, someone who won't panic or try to take control of the situation. He needs Glenn Rhee. An hour later, Daryl finds Glenn exactly where he expected, sitting alone behind the house, staring at the barn with the same haunted expression he's been wearing for days. Because Glenn has his own secret about that barn, his own weight he's been carrying. "We need to talk," Daryl says quietly, settling down beside him. Glenn looks startled, then wary. "About what?" "About what you found in the barn." The words hang in the air between them. Daryl watches Glenn's face cycle through denial, fear, and finally resignation. "I don't know what you mean," Glenn says, but his voice lacks conviction. "Yeah, you do. Question is whether you're going to help me with what I found, or if I'm going to have to figure this out on my own." Glenn is quiet for a long moment, studying Daryl's face. "What did you find?" "Sophia. She's alive, and she's in that barn." The effect is immediate. Glenn's face goes through shock, disbelief, hope, and terror in rapid succession. "That's impossible. I was just in there yesterday. I would have seen. She's in the loft. Been hiding there for 5 days, staying alive by being smarter than the rest of us put together." Glenn runs his hands through his hair, a gesture Daryl recognizes as his way of processing overwhelming information. Oh God, if she's been in there this whole time." "She's alive," Daryl emphasizes. "That's what matters. But getting her out, that's going to take 2 people who can keep their heads and work together." "The walkers," Glenn whispers. "There are at least a dozen of them in there. Maybe more." "I know. Sophia's been studying them. She says they have patterns, routines. We can use that. Glenn looks at him with something approaching admiration. She's been studying them for 5 days. Smart kid, smarter than we gave her credit for. They sit in silence for a moment, both processing the implications. Finally, Glenn speaks. What do you need me to do? Help me plan this right. You know the barn layout better than anyone. I know how to move quiet and think tactical. Together, maybe we can figure out how to get her out without anyone dying. Glenn nods slowly. When? Soon. She's weak, but she's holding on. The longer we wait, the more chance someone else finds out, or something goes wrong. Carol, Glenn says suddenly. She's going to want to know immediately. Daryl has been dreading this conversation. Not yet. Carol's. She's not thinking straight right now. Too much emotion, too much desperation. She'd want to charge in there and damn the consequences. You're going to keep this from her? From Sophia's own mother? The moral weight of this decision sits heavy on Daryl's shoulders. Until we have a real plan. Until we know we can get Sophia out alive. Carol's been through enough. I ain't gonna give her hope just to watch it get torn away if something goes wrong. Glenn considers this, and Daryl can see him working through the ethics of the situation. Finally, he nods. You're right. But we tell her the moment we're ready to move. Deal. As they begin to discuss logistics, sight lines, distraction methods, extraction routes, Daryl feels something he hasn't experienced in days. Hope, yes, but more than that. The certainty that comes from having the right partner for an impossible job. Sophia Pelletier is going to come home, and when she does, it's going to be because 2 men who barely knew each other a week ago learned to trust each other with the thing that matters most. But first, they have to figure out how to outsmart a barn full of walkers, keep their secret from people who love them, and execute a rescue mission that has no room for error. Just another day in the world after the world ended. As the sun sets over Herschel's farm, Daryl allows himself one moment of quiet satisfaction. For the first time in 5 days, the search for Sophia has a real purpose. Because now it's not a search anymore, it's a rescue mission. Chapter 3. The Extraction. There's a particular kind of terror that comes with executing a plan where everything has to go perfectly the first time. No practice runs, no margin for error, no second chances. In The Walking Dead, we've seen so many moments where careful planning meets unpredictable reality, where the difference between life and death comes down to split-second decisions and the kind of luck you can't count on, but desperately need anyway. The extraction of Sophia Pelletier from Herschel's barn is about to become one of those moments. It's late afternoon on the 6th day since Sophia went missing. The timing isn't ideal. Daryl would have preferred the cover of darkness. But Sophia's condition is deteriorating. When he'd checked on her this morning, she was noticeably weaker, her responses slower, her movements more careful. Whatever reserves of strength she'd been drawing on are running low, and waiting another day might mean waiting too long. Glenn has done his reconnaissance perfectly. He's mapped every walker in the barn, noted their positions and movement patterns, identified the optimal extraction route. They've settled on a plan that's equal parts ingenious and terrifying. A rope and pulley system that will let them lift Sophia directly from the loft to the ground outside, bypassing the walkers entirely. The rope is climbing rope from Dale's RV supplies. The pulleys are improvised from parts Glenn quietly liberated from farm equipment when Herschel wasn't looking. It's not pretty, but Glenn's engineering background suggests it should work, assuming everything goes according to plan. And in The Walking Dead, nothing ever goes according to plan. The opportunity comes when Rick and Herschel walk out to the far pasture to discuss the group's long-term presence on the farm. It's the conversation they've both been avoiding, the one about whether Rick's people are temporary guests or permanent residents. From Daryl's position by the barn, he can see them in the distance, their body language suggesting this is going to be a long discussion. "Now," he whispers to Glenn, who's been crouched behind the tractor, waiting for the signal. They move with practiced coordination, the result of 2 hours of planning and preparation. Glenn takes position at the front of the barn, ostensibly doing maintenance on the door hinges, a cover story that will explain his presence if anyone asks. His real job is to watch for complications and provide early warning if anyone approaches. Daryl moves to the back wall, where their improvised pulley system is already in place, hidden behind a stack of old fence posts that Herschel has been meaning to repair. The rope dangles down from the oak tree above, threaded through pulleys that will distribute Sophia's weight and make the extraction as quiet as possible. At the loose board, Daryl gives Sophia the signal they'd agreed on. 3 soft taps. Her face appears at the gap almost immediately. She's been waiting, ready. But even in the afternoon light filtering through the barn walls, he can see how much the ordeal has cost her. Her face is gaunt, her eyes hollowed by exhaustion and stress. "You ready for this?" he whispers. Sophia nods, but there's fear in her expression now. For 5 days, the loft has been her prison, but it's also been her safety. Leaving it means trusting her life to a plan she can't control, to people she barely knows, in a world that's already proven it can't be trusted. "It's going to be okay," Daryl tells her, and he hopes he's not lying. The rope feeds through the gap in the boards easily. Daryl has tied a simple harness at the end, nothing fancy, but enough to support her weight during the short lift to safety. But as Sophia reaches for the rope, her movements trigger a cascade of small disasters. Her foot, weakened by days of careful positioning, slips against the loft floor. The motion sends her stumbling backward, and her shoulder hits one of the support beams with a hollow thud that echoes through the barn below. The effect is immediate. The walkers who had been in their afternoon stupor suddenly become animated. Moans fill the barn as they begin to move, drawn by the sound from above. Several of them start reaching upward, their dead arms stretching toward the loft space where Sophia is trying to regain her balance. Through the gap in the boards, Daryl can see the panic in Sophia's eyes. 5 days of perfect silence, undone by one moment of weakness. "Stay calm," he whispers urgently. "Don't move." But the walkers are becoming more agitated by the second. Their moaning is getting louder, and worse, they're starting to cluster beneath the loft space. If one of them figures out how to climb the ladder that leads to the loft, or if the old wood gives way under their combined weight, Daryl's mind races through options. They can abort, wait for the walkers to settle down, try again later. But Sophia's strength is fading, and there's no guarantee they'll get another chance. Or they can commit to the plan, trust that their preparation was enough, and hope that quick action can overcome the complications. It's Glenn who makes the decision for them. "Daryl!" he hisses from the front of the barn. "Someone's coming up the path." Through the gap in the boards, Daryl can see exactly what Glenn sees. Shane Walsh, walking toward the barn with that particular stride that means he's looking for answers to questions no one wants to discuss. Shane's been suspicious of the group's secretive behavior around the barn, and his timing couldn't be worse. They're out of time. "Now or never," Daryl whispers to Sophia. "You trust me?" Sophia nods, and despite everything, the fear, the pain, the impossible circumstances, there's determination in her expression. This 12-year-old girl has survived 5 days in hell by making smart decisions. She's not going to stop now. The harness slips around her shoulders, and Daryl begins to pull. The rope and pulley system works exactly as Glenn designed it. Sophia's weight is distributed. The motion is smooth and controlled, but every second feels like an hour as she rises toward the gap in the barn wall. Below them, the walkers are reaching higher, some of them beginning to climb over each other in their agitation. The sound of their moaning is getting loud enough to attract attention, and Shane is getting closer. Sophia's head reaches the gap in the boards, just as the first walker's fingers brush against the bottom of the loft space. Daryl grabs her shoulders and pulls her through the opening with more force than he intended, both of them tumbling to the ground on the far side of the barn. For a moment, they just lie there, Sophia's face pressed against his chest, both of them breathing hard. She's out. She's alive. The impossible has happened, but they're not safe yet. "Glenn," Daryl whispers into his radio. "Where's Shane?" 30 seconds out, and he looks pissed. Daryl looks down at Sophia, who's struggling to sit up. 5 days of confinement have left her weak and disoriented, but her eyes are clear. She understands the situation. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Then we run. Quiet as we can." They make it to the RV, just as Shane rounds the corner of the barn. Through the window, Daryl watches Shane pause at the barn door, his head tilted as he listens to the agitated moaning from inside. For a heart-stopping moment, it looks like he's going to open the door and investigate. Instead, Shane shakes his head and continues toward the house, muttering something about goddamn things getting restless. Inside the RV, Sophia sits on the small couch, wrapped in one of Dale's blankets, holding a cup of water with hands that shake from exhaustion and adrenaline. She looks impossibly small, impossibly fragile, but there's something in her posture that speaks to an inner strength forged in the crucible of survival. "We did it," Glenn whispers, settling down across from them. "We actually did it." But Daryl knows better. Getting Sophia out of the barn was just the first step. Now comes the harder part, figuring out what to do with a living girl that everyone believes is dead, in a world where secrets have a way of destroying the people who keep them. Outside, the sun is setting over Herschel's farm, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It should be a moment of celebration, of triumph over impossible odds. Instead, it feels like the calm before an even bigger storm, because Sophia Pelletier is alive, and eventually everyone is going to want to know how and why, and what it means for the fragile peace they've built in this place, where the dead are kept behind barn doors, and the living pretend they can build something that might last. But for now, in the quiet safety of Dale's RV, with Sophia's breathing steady and her eyes beginning to flutter with the exhaustion that comes after crisis, Daryl allows himself to feel something he'd forgotten was possible. Hope. Real hope. The kind that comes from knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible plan actually works. The extraction is complete. Now the real challenges begin. Chapter 4. The Revelation. There are moments in life when the world splits cleanly in two, the before and the after. When everything you thought you knew about loss and hope and the cruel mathematics of survival suddenly gets rewritten in a single heartbeat. For Carol Pelletier, that moment comes at 7:23 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, when she opens the door to Dale's RV, looking for cleaning supplies, and instead finds her daughter sitting on the small couch, wrapped in a blanket, very much alive. The silence that follows lasts exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds where Carol's brain tries to process what her eyes are seeing, where the carefully constructed walls she's built around her grief come crashing down all at once, where the impossible becomes undeniably real. Then she breaks. It starts as a sob that seems to come from somewhere deeper than her chest, somewhere that's been hollow and aching for 6 days. Then she's moving, stumbling forward, her hands reaching out as if she's afraid Sophia might disappear if she doesn't hold on tight enough. "Baby," Carol whispers, and the word contains 6 days of terror, of prayer, of bargaining with a God she's not sure she believes in anymore. "Oh, my baby." Sophia looks up at her mother's voice, and the careful composure she's maintained since her rescue finally cracks. She's been strong for 5 days in that barn loft, strong through the rescue, strong while hiding in the RV. But when she sees her mother's face, sees the hollow exhaustion, the grief lines that have carved themselves around Carol's eyes, all of that strength simply dissolves. "Mama," Sophia whispers, and suddenly she's 12 years old again, not the survival-hardened girl who catalogued Walker behavior patterns, but a child who wants nothing more than her mother's arms around her. They collide in the middle of the RV's narrow aisle, Carol pulling Sophia against her chest with desperate intensity, both of them crying now, ugly, cathartic sobs that contain multitudes, relief and terror and gratitude and anger all tangled together in a release that's been 6 days in the making. For several minutes, neither of them speaks. They just hold each other, Carol's hands moving through Sophia's tangled hair, checking for injuries, reassuring herself that this is real, that her daughter is alive and breathing and warm against her chest. It's Sophia who pulls back first, her hands moving to frame her mother's face. "I'm okay, Mama. I'm really okay." But Carol can see that she's not entirely okay. Sophia is thinner than she was 6 days ago, her clothes hanging loose on her small frame. There are dark circles under her eyes, scratches on her hands and arms, and something in her expression that speaks to experiences no child should have to endure. "Where were you?" Carol asks, her voice cracking on the words. "We looked everywhere. Everywhere, baby. I thought I'd lost you." Sophia glances toward the RV's small window, where she can see the barn in the distance. "I was close, closer than you knew. But, Mama, there are things I have to tell you about what happened." As Sophia begins to recount her ordeal, the fall that knocked her unconscious, waking up in the barn, the days of hiding and surviving, Carol's emotions cycle through shock, horror, pride, and a growing undercurrent of anger. Not at Sophia, never at Sophia, but at the situation, at the world that forced her 12-year-old daughter to become a survival expert. "You were in Herschel's barn this whole time?" Carol's voice rises slightly. "While we were searching the woods, while Daryl was falling off cliffs looking for you, you were right here?" "Mama, I couldn't get out. There were dead people everywhere below me, and I didn't know if anyone would believe me if I tried to call for help. I didn't know who was safe." The explanation is logical, heartbreaking, and entirely reasonable for a child trying to survive in an impossible situation. But it doesn't diminish the ache Carol feels when she thinks about all the nights she's lain awake, all the prayers she's whispered, all the times she's stared at that barn and wondered if they should have looked harder, searched longer. The sound of footsteps on the RV's metal steps interrupts her thoughts. Daryl appears in the doorway, his expression cautious but determined. "How long have you known?" Carol asks quietly, and there's steel in her voice now. "Found her yesterday," Daryl admits. "Been planning how to get her out safe." "Yesterday." Carol repeats the word like she's testing its weight. "You've known for a whole day that my daughter was alive, and you didn't tell me." Daryl steps into the RV, closing the door behind him. His movements are careful, like he's approaching a wounded animal that might bolt or attack without warning. Had to make sure I could get her out without getting her killed, he explains. Barns full of walkers, Carol. One wrong move, one person acting on emotion instead of thinking it through. Emotion? Carol's voice goes dangerously quiet. You think I would have endangered my daughter because of emotion? I think you would have done anything to get to her, Daryl says simply. Same as any mother would, same as I wanted to do. But wanting to save someone, and knowing how to save someone, those ain't always the same thing. Sophia looks between her mother and Daryl, sensing the tension building in the small space. Mama, he saved me. Him and Glenn. They figured out how to get me out when the walkers were getting more active. If they'd waited, if they'd told everyone. Glenn knew too? There's hurt in Carol's voice now, layered beneath the anger. How many people knew my daughter was alive while I was falling apart? Daryl takes a step closer, his voice gentle but firm. Glenn found out about the walkers in the barn days ago. Been keeping that secret too. Sometimes keeping secrets ain't about trust. It's about keeping people alive. Carol looks at her daughter, really looks at her. Sees the intelligence in Sophia's eyes, the way she's processing the adult conversation happening around her, the strength she's developed over 6 days of impossible survival. Tell me what you learned, Carol says quietly. In that barn. Tell me everything. For the next hour, Sophia shares her observations about walker behavior, about the patterns she noticed, about Herschel's relationship with the dead people he keeps in his barn. She speaks with a clarity and detail that transforms her from victim to witness, from lost child to valuable source of intelligence. Carol listens, her hand never leaving Sophia's shoulder, and with every revelation, her perspective shifts. Her daughter didn't just survive, she thrived. She turned her prison into a laboratory, her terror into knowledge, her helplessness into power. I'm proud of you, Carol says finally, and means it completely. You did everything right, baby. Everything. But then she turns to Daryl. But next time, and God help us all if there is a next time, you tell me immediately. I don't care about the risks or the complications or the politics. She's my daughter. There won't be a next time, Daryl promises. We ain't losing her again. The sound of voices outside the RV reminds them all that their reunion is happening in the middle of a community that still believes Sophia is missing. Carol looks toward the window, where she can see Rick and Laurie by the farmhouse, probably discussing whether to extend the search for another day. We have to tell them, Carol says. Tonight? Daryl asks. Carol looks at Sophia, who's been quietly eating her first real meal in 6 days, canned peaches that Dale had stored in the RV's small pantry. Her daughter is exhausted, overwhelmed, and despite her remarkable resilience, she's still processing trauma that will take time to heal from. Tomorrow, Carol decides, let her rest tonight. Let me hold her for one night without having to share her with everyone else's reactions and questions and relief. Daryl nods, understanding completely. There will be time for group dynamics and difficult conversations and the complex logistics of moving forward. Tonight is for a mother and daughter who've been given back to each other against all odds. As the evening settles over Herschel's farm, Carol sits in Dale's RV with her daughter curled against her side, both of them finally able to breathe without the weight of loss crushing their chests. Outside, the rest of their group continues the routine of a world where Sophia is still missing. But inside the RV, in the quiet space between one impossible day and whatever comes next, Carol allows herself to feel something she'd forgotten was possible. Wholeness. the particular kind of peace that comes from having your most important person safe in your arms. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new secrets to manage, new dynamics to navigate. Tomorrow will bring the moment when hope becomes public knowledge, when private grief transforms into shared relief. But tonight belongs to them. A mother and daughter, reunited against all odds, learning to trust that sometimes, just sometimes, the world gives back what it takes away. And in the quiet of that discovery, Carol begins to understand something that will reshape everything about how she sees herself, her role in this group, and what she's capable of when the people she loves are at stake. The revelation isn't just that Sophia is alive. It's that survival isn't just about staying breathing. It's about staying connected to the people who make breathing worthwhile. Tomorrow, everything changes again. But tonight, they're exactly where they belong. Chapter 5. The growing conspiracy secrets have their own gravity. The bigger they get, the more they pull at everything around them, drawing in people who never intended to be conspirators, forcing decisions that no one wanted to make. In The Walking Dead, we've seen how secrets can poison relationships, tear apart groups, and create fault lines that eventually crack wide open when the pressure becomes too much to bear. The secret of Sophia's survival is about to learn this lesson the hard way. It's been 18 hours since Carol's reunion with her daughter, and the weight of what they're all carrying is beginning to show. Daryl moves through his morning routine with the hypervigilant awareness of someone constantly looking over his shoulder. Glenn jumps at every unexpected sound, every casual question about his whereabouts. Carol sits by the farmhouse window, watching Sophia play quietly behind the RV, and every muscle in her body is coiled like a spring. But it's the conversation they're about to have that will truly test how many people can share a secret before it stops being a secret at all. Herschel Green has been a veterinarian for 40 years. He's spent 4 decades reading animal behavior, understanding the subtle signs of distress, injury, and illness. Which is why, when Daryl approaches him after breakfast with the carefully rehearsed request to check on someone who might need medical attention, Herschel's experienced eye immediately picks up on the nervous energy radiating from the younger man. "Someone in your group is injured?" Herschel asks, setting down his coffee cup. "Not exactly injured," Daryl says carefully, "but someone who's been through an ordeal. Someone who needs to stay quiet about it for now." The way Daryl phrases it, the deliberate vagueness, the emphasis on secrecy, sends warning signals through Herschel's mind. But his medical training overrides his suspicion. If someone needs help, the rest can be sorted out later. That philosophy lasts exactly until he follows Daryl to the RV and sees Sophia Pelletier sitting at the small table, very much alive, and eating scrambled eggs that Carol has prepared with hands that still shake slightly every time she looks at her daughter. Herschel stops in the doorway like he's walked into a wall. His face cycles through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching anger as the implications hit him all at once. "She's been here?" His voice is carefully controlled, but there's steel underneath. "This child has been here, on my property, while her mother has been tearing herself apart with grief?" "Herschel," Carol starts, but he holds up a hand. "She's been here," he continues, his voice gaining volume. "And you didn't think to mention this to me? To any of us?" Sophia looks up from her eggs, and when she speaks, her voice is steady, despite the tension filling the small space. "I was in your barn, Mr. Green, with the sick people you're keeping there." The words hit Herschel like a physical blow. Because Sophia doesn't know the careful euphemisms he's been using, doesn't understand the delicate fiction he's maintained about the family members in his barn. To her, they're just what they obviously are. Dead people who move around and try to bite living things. You were in the barn? Herschel's voice drops to a whisper. With them? For 5 days, Sophia confirms. I hid in the loft and watched them. They have patterns, routines. They're not really sick, are they? They're dead. The silence that follows is deafening. Because this 12-year-old girl has just spoken the truth that Herschel has been desperately avoiding, the reality he's refused to acknowledge even as it shambled around his barn, moaning and reaching for flesh with dead hands. Daryl steps forward, recognizing that they've reached the crucial moment. She survived by being smart about them, by understanding what they are and how they behave. But to get her out safe, we needed to know what we were dealing with in that barn. What you were dealing with, Herschel repeats slowly, is my wife, my stepson, people I've loved and cared for. Carol moves to stand beside her daughter, and when she speaks, there's a new authority in her voice that wasn't there a week ago. Mr. Green, I understand that you loved them, but they're not people anymore, and keeping them in that barn almost cost me my daughter's life. It's a line drawn in the sand, clear and unmistakable. Carol Pelletier, who spent months deferring to stronger personalities, apologizing for taking up space, accepting whatever scraps of safety and belonging she could find, that Carol is gone. In her place stands a woman who's gotten her child back from the dead and will not allow anyone, no matter how kind or well-intentioned, to put that child at risk again. Herschel looks between Carol's determined face and Sophia's calm expression, and something fundamental shifts in his understanding of the situation. These people aren't guests on his farm anymore. They're not even refugees seeking temporary shelter. They're a family protecting their own, and they've just made it clear that they'll do whatever it takes to keep each other safe. What exactly are you asking of me? Herschel says finally. Help us figure out how to deal with the walkers in the barn without anyone else finding out Sophia was there, Daryl explains, and help us keep this secret until we can figure out how to tell the others without everything falling apart. It's a reasonable request, phrased diplomatically. But Herschel isn't naive. He understands the subtext. They're not really asking for his help. They're informing him that he's now part of their conspiracy, whether he wants to be or not, because the alternative is having his carefully maintained illusions shattered in front of everyone in the most public and traumatic way possible. Before Herschel can respond, Glenn's voice crackles over the radio. Daryl, Carol, we've got a problem. Shane's asking questions. Through the RV's window, they can see Shane Walsh standing near the barn, his hands on his hips, his head tilted as he listens to the moaning from inside. But worse than that, they can see him looking around the farmyard with the focused intensity of someone who's noticed that pieces don't quite fit together. He's been watching us, Glenn's voice continues, all of us, and he's starting to put together that something's not right. Carol's hand moves instinctively to Sophia's shoulder, a protective gesture that speaks to every parent's worst nightmare, having to choose between keeping their child safe and keeping their community intact. What's he asking about specifically? Daryl responds into the radio. Why I've been spending so much time around the barn. Why you've been acting different since yesterday. Why Carol seems, I don't know, lighter somehow, like a weight's been lifted. The observation is uncomfortably accurate. Carol has been different since finding Sophia. Less haunted, more present, carrying herself with the confidence that comes from having hope restored. It's exactly the kind of change that someone like Shane, trained to read people and situations, would notice immediately. We need a cover story, Daryl says quietly. Something that explains the behavior without revealing the truth. But it's Sophia who provides the solution, speaking up from her place at the table with the clear logic of someone who's spent 5 days thinking through problems from every angle. Tell him you found something of mine, something that gives you hope I'm still alive, but not enough to know where I am. That would explain why Mr. Daryl is acting different, and why Mama seems lighter. The adults in the RV look at her with something approaching awe, because it's not just a good plan, it's a brilliant plan. It gives Shane enough information to satisfy his curiosity while maintaining the larger secret, and it provides a reasonable explanation for everyone's changed behavior. What kind of something? Carol asks. Sophia reaches into her pocket and pulls out a small hair ribbon, dirty and torn from her ordeal. This. You can say Mr. Daryl found it caught on a branch near the creek. Close enough to give hope, not close enough to know for sure. Herschel watches this exchange with growing understanding. This isn't just about keeping secrets anymore. It's about a group of people who've learned to think tactically, to plan several moves ahead, to protect each other from threats both external and internal. Shane's not going to stop asking questions, Herschel says quietly. That man doesn't accept easy answers. Then we give him harder questions to focus on, Carol replies, and there's steel in her voice now. Questions about the walkers in your barn. Questions about what happens when the rest of the group finds out you've been keeping them there. It's not quite a threat, but it's not a threat either. Carol is making it clear that if Shane's curiosity threatens her daughter's safety, she's prepared to redirect that curiosity toward truths that will be much more uncomfortable for everyone involved. Herschel nods slowly, understanding the full scope of what he's agreeing to. What do you need me to do? Over the next hour, they plan their deception with the thoroughness of a military operation. Glenn will find Sophia's ribbon and bring it to Daryl. Daryl will share the discovery with Carol, explaining everyone's improved mood. Herschel will begin gradually reducing the walker population in his barn, claiming that some of his family members have finally found peace. It's a complex web of half-truths and careful omissions, but it's also something more than that. It's a family protecting itself, using intelligence and cooperation instead of violence and confrontation. As the sun reaches its zenith over Herschel's farm, 5 people sit in a 12-foot RV and finalize plans that will either keep their secret safe or destroy the fragile peace they've all worked to build. But for Sophia, sitting quietly at the center of it all, this feels remarkably similar to her time in the barn loft. She's surrounded by potential danger, dependent on careful planning and perfect execution, trusting her survival to people who have proven they're willing to take risks to protect her. The only difference is that this time, she's not alone. This time, she has a family around her. Not just her mother, but a chosen family of people who've decided that her life is worth whatever complicated truths they have to navigate. Outside the RV, Shane Walsh continues his investigation, unaware that he's about to be handed a carefully crafted piece of evidence that will redirect his suspicions just long enough for the people he's watching to solidify their conspiracy. The secret is growing, pulling in more people, creating more complications. But it's also creating something else. A bond forged in shared risk, shared purpose, and the understanding that sometimes protecting the people you love requires becoming someone you never thought you'd have to be. In The Walking Dead, survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about deciding who you're willing to become in order to keep the people you love alive with you. And for this group, that decision has already been made. Chapter 6. The Shane problem. There's a particular kind of tension that builds when two incompatible truths exist in the same space for too long. Like fault lines in the earth, the pressure builds invisibly until something gives way and the ground shifts beneath everyone's feet. In The Walking Dead, we've seen this pattern play out again and again. Secrets create pressure, pressure creates confrontation, and confrontation reveals who people really are when everything is on the line. The Shane Walsh problem has been building for days, and it's about to reach its breaking point in the worst possible way. It starts with Shane doing what Shane does best, pushing boundaries, demanding answers, refusing to accept the careful social agreements that keep communities functioning. He's been watching the subtle changes in group behavior, cataloging the small inconsistencies, building a case in his mind that something significant is being hidden from him. And Shane Walsh has never been good at being left out. The morning of the 7th day since Sophia's disappearance begins like any other. Carol sits by the RV, reading to Sophia from one of Carl's comic books. Daryl cleans his crossbow with the methodical precision of someone who needs his hands busy while his mind processes complex problems. Glenn helps Dale with minor repairs that don't really need doing, both of them finding comfort in routine tasks that feel manageable. But Shane is hunting. He moves through the farmyard with the focused intensity of a predator who's caught a scent. His eyes track movement patterns, note conversations that stop when he approaches, register the way people's body language changes when he asks casual questions about their activities. The mistake that breaks everything open comes from the most innocent source possible. Carl Grimes, age 11, who's been told that Sophia is still missing and that everyone is working hard to find her, sees movement through the RV window and calls out with the excitement of a child who thinks he's helping. "Hey Shane, Sophia's in the RV!" The words hang in the morning air like a gunshot echo. Every adult in hearing distance freezes, their faces cycling through horror, resignation, and the particular kind of panic that comes when a carefully constructed plan collapses in real time. Shane's head snaps toward the RV, and in that moment, every suspicion he's harbored crystallizes into understanding. The secretive behavior, the improved moods, the way conversations die when he approaches. It's not about keeping bad news from him. It's about keeping good news from him. He's at the RV door in 4 long strides, pulling it open with enough force to make the hinges protest. Inside, Carol's arm tightens around Sophia's shoulders, and Daryl's hand moves instinctively toward his knife. But there's nowhere to run, no way to deny what Shane can see with his own eyes. "Well, well, well," Shane says, his voice carrying the particular edge it gets when he's trying to process betrayal and rage simultaneously. "Look who decided to come back from the dead." Sophia looks up at him, with the steady gaze she's developed over 6 days of survival. But she doesn't speak. She's learned to read danger in adult voices, and something in Shane's tone makes every instinct tell her to stay very, very still. "Shane," Carol starts, but he cuts her off with a gesture that's just aggressive enough to make Daryl stand up. No, you don't get to Shane me right now. How long?" "How long what?" Carol's voice is carefully controlled, but there's steel underneath that wasn't there a week ago. "How long has she been here? How long have you people been lying to my face while I'm out there risking my neck looking for a girl who was never lost?" "She was lost," Daryl says quietly, "and she was found. End of story." But Shane's not interested in simple explanations. He's interested in the larger pattern, the bigger picture that this revelation illuminates. Because if they've been lying about Sophia, what else have they been lying about? "Where was she?" Shane demands. "Where was she that you couldn't tell the rest of us? Where was she that required this big conspiracy?" The silence that follows is deafening, because that's the question that leads to all the other questions, about the barn, about Herschel's secrets, about the walkers that Shane doesn't know are 20 yards away. She was safe, Carol says finally. She was safe, and now she's safer. Safe where? Shane's voice rises, and through the RV window they can see other members of the group beginning to notice the commotion. Safe where, Carol? It's Rick who appears in the doorway behind Shane, drawn by voices that carry the unmistakable sound of conflict about to boil over. His face cycles through confusion, shock, and something approaching relief when he sees Sophia alive and well. Jesus Christ, Rick breathes. Sophia, you're okay. She's been okay, Shane says, turning to face Rick with an expression that promises this conversation is far from over. Question is, why didn't we know that? Why has our whole group been kept in the dark about something this important? Rick looks around the RV, at Carol's protective posture, at Daryl's defensive stance, at the way everyone's body language speaks to shared secrets and unified purpose. The political dynamics are immediately clear to him, even if the details aren't. Maybe we should take this outside, Rick suggests. Let Sophia rest while we figure out what's been happening. But Shane's not interested in careful, diplomatic conversations. He's interested in answers, and he's interested in them right now. I know what's been happening, Shane says. What's been happening is that some people in this group think they get to make decisions for everyone else, think they get to keep secrets that affect all of us. What secrets? Rick asks, but he's looking at Daryl when he says it. That's what I want to know. Because if they're keeping secrets about Sophia, what other secrets are they keeping? What else don't we know about this place? About the people we're trusting with our lives? The questions hang in the air like live grenades, because Shane is pointing toward truths that no one is ready to discuss. The barn full of walkers, Herschel's delusions about dead family members, the complex web of lies and half-truths that have been necessary to keep Sophia safe and the group intact. But it's Sophia herself who breaks the tension, speaking up from her place beside her mother, with the clear voice of someone who's learned to think strategically about survival. I was hiding, she says simply. I was hiding because there were dangerous things around, and the grown-ups who found me had to figure out how to get me out safely without anyone getting hurt. It's not the whole truth, but it's true enough, and it's delivered with the kind of straightforward logic that makes Shane's aggressive questioning seem overwrought by comparison. Hiding where? Shane asks, but his tone is less confrontational now. In a place where dead people were walking around, Sophia continues, and Mr. Daryl and Mr. Glenn figured out how to get me out without the dead people hurting anyone. The partial revelation hits Rick like a physical blow, because he understands immediately what she's describing, even if he doesn't know the specifics. Walkers. Sophia was trapped somewhere with walkers, and instead of calling for help, Daryl and Glenn mounted their own rescue operation. You were with walkers? Rick's voice carries the particular horror of a father imagining his own child in that situation. I was hiding from walkers, Sophia corrects, and I was learning about them, how they move, what they do, how to stay safe around them. Shane looks between Sophia's calm face and the adult's tense expressions, and his law enforcement instincts tell him that there are still significant pieces of this story missing. But he's also beginning to understand that this isn't a case of irresponsible secret-keeping. It's a case of people making hard decisions under impossible circumstances. Where? He asks again, but this time it's a request for information rather than an accusation. Daryl and Carol exchange glances, and in that silent communication, a decision is made. The truth is coming out whether they're ready or not. The only question now is how to manage the revelation to minimize the damage. Herschel's barn, Daryl says quietly. She was in the loft of Herschel's barn, with about a dozen walkers below her. The impact of this information is immediate and devastating. Rick's face goes white as he processes the implications. Not just that Sophia was in mortal danger, but that there are walkers on the property where his son sleeps every night. There are walkers in Herschel's barn? Rick's voice is deadly quiet. Herschel calls them family members, Glenn adds, stepping into the RV. He's been keeping them there, hoping to find a cure. Shane's expression shifts from anger to something approaching vindication, because this is exactly what he's been afraid of, that their hosts have been keeping secrets that could get them all killed. And you didn't think the rest of us needed to know this? Shane's voice is rising again. You didn't think we had a right to know we're sleeping 50 yards away from a walker pen? We were handling it, Daryl says, quietly, without anyone getting hurt. By handling it, you mean keeping us all in the dark about a threat to our safety. By handling it, I mean getting a little girl out of danger without starting a war with the people giving us shelter. The two approaches, Shane's confrontational directness and Daryl's careful strategy, represent a fundamental split in how to survive in the new world. Force versus finesse, immediate action versus long-term planning, individual safety versus group cohesion. Rick stands in the doorway, processing all of this information, understanding that he's facing a leadership crisis that goes far beyond the revelation about Sophia. Because his group has split into factions, making major decisions without him, and now he has to find a way to bring them back together before the divisions become permanent. What's the plan now? Rick asks quietly. We clear the barn, Shane says immediately. We end this threat before someone gets killed. We talk to Herschel, Daryl counters. We find a solution that doesn't destroy our relationship with the people keeping us alive. I've been talking to Herschel, Rick says. He's not ready to accept what those things are. Sophia looks up at the adults, arguing over her head, and speaks with the authority of someone who's spent 5 days studying the problem firsthand. The dead people in the barn aren't dangerous if you understand how they work, she says. But they're not people anymore either. Mr. Herschel is wrong about that part. The simple clarity of her assessment cuts through the adult posturing like a knife. Because she's right on both counts, the walkers are manageable if handled correctly, but Herschel's denial about their nature is dangerous. So what do we do? Rick asks, looking around the RV at the faces of people who've become a family through crisis and shared purpose. We compromise, Carol says firmly. We clear the barn, but we do it carefully. We respect Herschel's feelings without endangering anyone's safety, and we do it together, as a group. It's not the aggressive action Shane wants, or the careful secrecy Daryl prefers, but it's a path forward that acknowledges everyone's concerns while prioritizing the safety of the people they all care about. Shane nods reluctantly. Rick agrees with visible relief, and in the quiet that follows, they begin to plan an operation that will either bring their fractured group back together or tear it apart completely. Outside the RV, Herschel Green tends to his morning chores, unaware that his world is about to change forever. Inside, a group of people who've learned to be a family in the hardest possible way prepare to face their biggest challenge yet. Not the walkers in the barn. They've already proven they can handle that. The challenge of staying united when survival requires making choices that reveal who they really are, underneath all the careful politeness and social agreements that hold civilized people together. In The Walking Dead, the living are always more dangerous than the dead. But sometimes, if you're very careful and very lucky, they can also be more hopeful. Chapter 7. The Controlled Burn. There's a difference between ending something and honoring its ending, between destruction and transformation. In The Walking Dead, we've seen both approaches, the brutal efficiency that treats death as just another problem to solve, and the more complex process that acknowledges what's being lost, even as it accepts what must be done. The clearing of Herschel's barn is about to become a master class in the difference between those two philosophies. It begins at dawn, when the morning mist still clings to the pastures, and the world feels suspended between night and day. The perfect time for difficult transitions. Rick stands outside the barn with a clipboard that Glenn has prepared, a methodical inventory of every walker inside, their positions, their probable identities, based on clothing and physical characteristics. It's not just tactical planning. It's an attempt to restore humanity to a process that could easily become purely mechanical. 14 total, Glenn reports quietly. Based on what Sophia observed, most of them are clustered near the center of the space. A few remain mobile along the perimeter. Herschel approaches, carrying a small wooden crate, his face drawn but resolute. Inside the crate are personal effects, wedding rings, family photographs, a child's toy, items he's prepared to bury after the clearing is complete. Because this isn't just about removing threats, it's about laying the dead to rest properly. "You don't have to do this," Rick tells him. "We can handle it ourselves." "They're my family," Herschel replies, and his voice carries both grief and acceptance. "If this is how they find peace, then I need to be the one to give it to them." The plan they've developed over hours of careful discussion reflects everything this group has learned about working together instead of working against each other. No chaotic violence, no unnecessary risk, no dramatic confrontations. Just methodical, respectful, careful work that acknowledges the weight of what they're doing. Carol sits with Sophia on a blanket near the oak tree, close enough to be part of the ceremony, but far enough away to ensure safety. Sophia has asked to witness this, not out of morbid curiosity, but from the understanding that this moment represents the end of her ordeal and the beginning of something new. "Are you sure you want to watch this, baby?" Carol asks. Sophia nods with the gravity of someone who's already seen more death than most adults. "I lived with them for 5 days. I should be here when they get to rest." It's a perspective that only she could have, seeing the barn walkers not as monsters or family members, but as beings trapped in a state that serves no one. Her presence transforms what could have been a grim necessity into something closer to a memorial service. Daryl takes point position at the barn door, crossbow ready but not raised aggressively. Behind him, Rick and Shane wait with weapons drawn, but lowered. The tension between Shane's preferred approach and the group's chosen method is visible in their posture. But Shane has agreed to follow the plan. "Remember," Rick says quietly, "one at a time. No unnecessary noise. Let Herschel say what he needs to say." The first walker that emerges is an elderly woman in a faded floral dress. Herschel's breath catches when he sees her, and for a moment, the careful planning threatens to collapse under the weight of emotion. "Lacey," he whispers, "my neighbor. She brought us casseroles every Sunday after Martha died." Daryl's crossbow bolt is quick and clean, and Lacey collapses without ceremony. But what happens next transforms the moment from execution to ceremony. Herschel kneels beside her body, removes a small gold bracelet from her wrist, and places it gently in his wooden crate. "Thank you for the kindness you showed my family," he says softly. "Rest now." It's not much. A few words, a recovered memento, a moment of acknowledgement. But it changes everything about what they're doing. This isn't pest control or threat elimination. This is a funeral service for people who died before their bodies stopped moving. The process continues with methodical precision. Each walker is called out individually, allowed to emerge without the panic that would come from opening all the doors at once. Daryl's shots are precise, merciful, and after each one, Herschel performs his small ritual of remembrance. A teenage boy in a high school jacket. Tommy. He worked summers on the farm, wanted to be a veterinarian like me. A middle-aged man in overalls. Frank. He fixed my tractor more times than I can count. Never took payment. An older woman with silver hair. Mrs. Patterson. She taught Sunday school for 40 years. With each name, each story, each small ceremony, the barn walkers transform from threats to be eliminated into people to be mourned. And something unexpected happens to the living participants. Instead of becoming hardened by the process, they become more connected to each other and to the gravity of what survival requires. Shane, who had advocated for quick, efficient disposal, finds himself standing straighter during each brief eulogy. Glenn removes his cap during the ceremonies. Carol holds Sophia closer, not from fear, but from a shared understanding of loss. By mid-morning, they've cleared half the barn. The work is taking longer than Shane's approach would have, but it's also accomplishing something more complex than simple problem-solving. It's creating closure, processing grief, and establishing protocols for how this group handles death when it comes to them again. And in The Walking Dead, death always comes again. During a break in the clearing, while Herschel sits quietly with his crate of recovered memories, Sophia approaches the barn entrance with curious eyes. The loft where she spent 5 days is visible from the ground now, and seeing it from this angle gives her a new perspective on her survival. There, she points to a corner of the loft space. That's where I kept the water I collected from the roof leaks, and there's where I hid when Mr. Herschel came to visit them. Glenn follows her pointing finger and notices something else. Wooden crates stacked in the loft space, barely visible from below. Sophia? What's in those boxes up there? I don't know. I never opened them. I was trying not to touch anything that wasn't mine. With the barn floor now clear enough to navigate safely, Glenn climbs the ladder to investigate Sophia's discovery. What he finds changes their understanding of Herschel's preparations and the farm's potential for long-term survival. "Medical supplies," Glenn calls down. "Antibiotics, surgical equipment, emergency food rations, enough to last months." Herschel looks up from his wooden crate with surprise. "I'd forgotten about those. Emergency supplies I stored when the crisis began, before I understood what we were really facing." The discovery adds another layer to their understanding of this place and this moment. Herschel hasn't just been keeping walkers in his barn, he's been maintaining it as a survival resource, a repository of supplies that could keep a community alive through extended crisis. As the afternoon progresses, and the last few walkers are cleared with the same ceremony and respect as the first, the barn begins its transformation from tomb to shelter. The space that held death for so long is becoming something else. A place where the living can store resources, plan for the future, and build something that might last. Rick sweeps the last of the debris from the barn floor, while Daryl checks the structural integrity of the loft space. Herschel buries his crate of recovered mementos in a small ceremony attended by the entire group, including Sophia, who places a Cherokee rose on the fresh earth. Shane, who had wanted to handle this problem with explosive efficiency. finds himself participating in the burial ceremony with something approaching solemnity. Because he's beginning to understand that the way they handle death shapes who they become as people, and who they become as people determines whether they survive, not just physically, but spiritually. As the sun sets over Herschel's farm, the barn stands empty for the first time in months. But it's not the emptiness of abandonment. It's the emptiness of potential, of space waiting to be filled with life instead of death. Sophia stands in the doorway, looking up at the loft where she spent 5 days learning to survive. But she's not the same girl who hid there in terror. She's someone who's learned that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about maintaining your humanity while you do it. It looks different now, she tells her mother. How does it look different? Carol asks. Lighter, Sophia says, after considering the question carefully. Like it's ready for something new to happen. And in that observation, this 12-year-old girl captures something that the adults have been struggling to articulate. The controlled burn approach to clearing the barn hasn't just eliminated threats, it's created space. Physical space for storage and shelter, but also emotional space for healing, planning, and hope. The barn that once held Sophia prisoner has become a symbol of what's possible when people choose cooperation over conflict, ceremony over efficiency, respect over expedience. It's still the same building, but it serves a completely different purpose now. In The Walking Dead, transformation is always possible, but it requires the kind of patience, respect, and community cooperation that turns destruction into renewal, ending into beginning, death into the foundation for new life. The controlled burn is complete. The real building can begin. Chapter 8. New Dynamics. There's a particular kind of dissonance that happens when someone you remember as one thing returns as someone completely different. When the categories you've used to understand them no longer fit, and you have to rebuild your entire relationship around a new reality. In The Walking Dead, we've seen this happen with places. How a school becomes a fortress, how a farm becomes a battleground. But it's more complex when it happens with people, especially when those people are children who've been forced to become something else entirely. Sophia's reintegration into the group is about to challenge every assumption they've held about childhood, innocence, and what it means to protect the people you love. The first test comes at dinner, the night after the barn clearing. For the first time in a week, the entire group gathers around Herschel's dining table for a communal meal. It should be a celebration. Sophia is alive. The barn threat has been neutralized, and they've proven that they can work together to solve complex problems. Instead, it's awkward in ways that no one anticipated. Sophia sits beside Carol, picking at Patricia's carefully prepared stew, and every eye in the room keeps drifting toward her. Not with malicious intent. Everyone is genuinely happy that she's safe, but with the kind of fascinated concern that makes normal conversation impossible. So, Dale ventures, his voice carrying the forced cheerfulness of someone trying to navigate uncharted social territory. Sophia, how are you feeling? Being back with everyone? It's a reasonable question. It's also the kind of question that an adult asks a child when they want to assess psychological damage while pretending to make casual conversation. Sophia recognizes this immediately. 5 days of survival have taught her to read adult intentions with remarkable accuracy. I'm fine, she answers politely, but there's something in her tone that suggests the conversation is more complex than her words indicate. Carl, who's been unusually quiet since learning that Sophia was never actually lost, finally speaks up. Were you really scared? In the barn with all those walkers? The adults tense, ready to redirect Carl away from potentially traumatic topics. But Sophia considers his questions seriously, as if she's been waiting for someone to ask something real instead of something safe. At first, she admits. But then I realized they couldn't get up to where I was, and I started watching them instead of being afraid of them. Watching them how? Carl's interest is genuine, not morbid. He's beginning to understand that Sophia has experienced something that might be valuable rather than just traumatic. Learning their patterns, when they're active, when they rest, what sounds they respond to, how they move as a group versus individually. The adults exchange glances. Because Sophia isn't describing trauma, she's describing research, scientific observation conducted under the most dangerous possible circumstances by someone who turned terror into intelligence. Rick clears his throat. Sophia, that was very smart thinking, but you shouldn't have had to do that alone. I wasn't alone, Sophia corrects matter-of-factly. I was with them. I just wasn't in danger from them once I understood how they worked. The statement hangs in the dining room air like a small bomb, because Sophia has just described the walkers, the monsters that haunt their nightmares, the threats they spend every waking moment preparing to fight, as company. Not good company, but not pure terror either. Just fellow occupants of a space, each following their own behavioral patterns. Laurie shifts uncomfortably. Honey, those things they're not people anymore. I know, Sophia says patiently, in the tone of someone explaining something obvious. But they're not random either. They follow rules. If you know the rules, you can stay safe around them. Shane, who's been unusually quiet since the barn clearing, finally speaks. What kind of rules? And just like that, the dinner conversation transforms from awkward small talk into a tactical briefing. Because everyone at the table recognizes that Sophia has first-hand intelligence about walker behavior that could save their lives. For the next hour, Sophia shares her observations with the systematic thoroughness of someone who's had nothing to do but take notes for 5 days. She draws diagrams on napkins, demonstrates movement patterns with salt shakers, and answers questions with the kind of detail that would make a professional researcher proud. The adults listen with growing amazement and discomfort. Amazement at Sophia's intelligence and resilience. Discomfort at the realization that their 12-year-old has developed survival skills that exceed their own in some areas. Carl listens with pure admiration. You're like a walker expert now. Sophia smiles for the first time all evening. I guess I am. The next morning brings their first training session. It starts informally. Daryl asking Sophia to show him what she means about walker movement patterns, but quickly evolves into something more structured as other group members gather to observe. Standing outside the now empty barn, Sophia demonstrates how walkers respond differently to direct versus peripheral movement, how they cluster around consistent noise sources, and how they can be distracted by competing stimuli. The key is not being more interesting than whatever they're already focused on, she explains, moving slowly around the barn's perimeter to show how walkers inside would track her movement. If you can avoid becoming the most interesting thing in their environment, you can move around them safely. Glenn takes notes. Dale asks clarifying questions. Even Shane nods approvingly at her tactical thinking. But it's Carol who asks the harder question. Baby, should you be teaching this? Should you have to know this? The question cuts to the heart of every parent's dilemma in the new world. How do you protect your child's innocence while also preparing them for reality? How do you balance the desire to let them be children with the necessity of keeping them alive? Sophia considers her mother's question with the same seriousness she's brought to everything else. I already know it, Mama. The question is whether everyone else gets to know it, too. Rick steps forward, recognizing the leadership moment for what it is. Sophia, would you be willing to share what you've learned with all of us, regularly, as part of our group's survival training? It's a remarkable question, because Rick is asking a 12-year-old to become a teacher, a strategic advisor, a contributing member of their survival community. He's asking her to take on responsibility that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Yes, Sophia answers without hesitation, but I want Carl to learn too, and anyone else who might need to know. Deal, Rick says, and extends his hand for a formal handshake. The training sessions become a regular part of their routine. Every morning, before the heat makes outdoor activity uncomfortable, Sophia conducts what the group starts calling Walker School. She shares her observations, demonstrates safe movement techniques, and answers questions with the patience of someone who understands that this knowledge could save lives. But the integration isn't without challenges. 3 nights after her return, Sophia wakes up screaming. Carol rushes to her side, expecting to find her daughter reliving the terror of being trapped with walkers. Instead, she finds something more complex. Sophia is dreaming about the people she watched die. The barn walkers weren't just threats to her. They were also her only company for 5 days. She watched them, learned from them, and in some strange way became attached to them. I miss them, Sophia sobs against Carol's shoulder. I know that's crazy, but they were with me, and now they're gone. It's a type of grief that none of the adults know how to handle. Survivor's guilt mixed with Stockholm Syndrome, mixed with genuine loss. Sophia is mourning monsters who could have killed her, and she's mourning them because they didn't. The nightmares continue for weeks, requiring new routines and support systems. Carol starts sleeping in the RV with Sophia instead of in the farmhouse. Daryl checks on them both before his night watch shifts. Herschel provides mild sedatives when the dreams become too intense. But slowly, the nightmares fade and are replaced by something else. Confidence. Sophia begins participating in group discussions about safety and tactics. She offers opinions about watch rotations and supply runs. She becomes not just a child who needs protection, but a community member who contributes to everyone's protection. The change is most visible in her relationship with Carl. Before her disappearance, they were casual friends, kids thrown together by circumstance, finding common ground in comic books and shared boredom. Now they're something else. Peers who've both been forced to grow up faster than anyone wanted, who understand things about survival that the adults are still learning. They develop their own training routines, practicing quiet movement and hand signals. They quiz each other on walker behavior patterns and emergency procedures. They're still children in many ways. They laugh at jokes, argue about comic book heroes, and need adult guidance and protection. But they're also junior members of a survival community with real responsibilities and genuine expertise that the adults have learned to respect. The shift becomes official during a group meeting about winter preparations. Rick is discussing security protocols when Sophia raises her hand. Yes, Sophia. When we're talking about night watches, are we considering how walker activity changes in cold weather? Because I noticed patterns in the barn that might be relevant. The question is asked with the confidence of someone who knows her input is valued. Rick nods and adjusts the agenda to include her observations. Shane, who had initially been skeptical about including children in tactical discussions, finds himself taking notes on Sophia's weather-related insights. Because this is what survival in The Walking Dead really looks like. Not heroic individuals making dramatic sacrifices, but communities that include everyone's expertise, regardless of age or traditional social roles. As autumn settles deeper over Herschel's farm, the group establishes new routines that acknowledge their changed understanding of childhood and responsibility. Sophia and Carl attend tactical meetings, but also have designated time for schoolwork and play. They contribute to security planning, but are also protected from the most dangerous patrol duties. It's a balance that would have been impossible before Sophia's ordeal. The balance between protecting innocence and acknowledging competence, between childhood and survival, between what children should know and what they need to know. Sitting by the evening fire, watching Sophia teach Carl a new hand signal, while Carol watches with pride and worry in equal measure, Rick understands that their definition of family has evolved again. They're not just adults caring for children anymore. They're a community where everyone contributes according to their abilities, where survival depends not just on strength or experience, but on observation, intelligence, and the willingness to learn from whoever has something valuable to teach. In The Walking Dead, growing up isn't about reaching a certain age. It's about reaching a certain understanding of how the world works and what you're capable of contributing to the people who matter most. Sophia Pelletier understands both those things now, and her community is stronger because they've learned to see her not just as someone to be protected, but as someone who can help protect others. The new dynamics are settled. The real work of building a sustainable community can begin. Chapter 9. The Ripple Effects. Sometimes the most significant changes in our lives happen not in dramatic moments of crisis, but in the quiet spaces afterward, when we're processing what we've been through and discovering who we've become in the process. In The Walking Dead, we've seen how survival creates bonds between people who might never have found each other in the old world, how shared trauma can forge connections deeper than blood relations. But we've also seen how those same experiences can reveal truths about ourselves that we didn't know were there. The rescue of Sophia Pelletier is about to demonstrate how a single act of cooperation can reshape an entire community's understanding of what they're capable of together. 2 weeks have passed since the barn clearing, and the autumn morning finds Carol and Daryl working side by side in what was once Herschel's vegetable garden. They're expanding it, planning for a winter crop rotation that assumes they'll still be here come spring, making decisions that reflect confidence in their long-term future on the farm. But more than that, they're talking, really talking, in a way that neither of them has done with another person in longer than either can remember. "You didn't have to do what you did," Carol says, carefully transplanting late-season lettuce seedlings. "Risk everything for her. For us." Daryl pauses in his work, his hands stilled around a fence post he's been securing. "Yeah, I did." "No," Carol insists, and there's something new in her voice. Not the grateful deference she's shown him since Sophia's rescue, but genuine curiosity about the man who's become so important to their survival. "You chose to." There's a difference. The distinction matters to her, and somehow that makes it matter to him. Because Carol is right. He made a choice that went beyond simple tactical necessity. Somewhere in those desperate hours of planning Sophia's rescue, Daryl Dixon had crossed a line from protecting a group member to protecting family. "She's a good kid," he says finally, which doesn't really answer Carol's implied question, but somehow answers it completely. "She is. But so is Carl, and I don't think you would have climbed into a walker-infested barn for him." Daryl looks at her then, really looks, and sees something he'd missed before. Carol isn't just grateful for what he did. She's trying to understand what it means, what it says about who they are to each other and who they might become. Maybe not, he admits, but Carl's got Rick and Laurie. Sophia just had you. And you. He trails off, not sure how to finish the sentence without saying more than he's ready to say. And I what? You needed her back. It's simple and profound and entirely true. Carol did need Sophia back, not just as a mother needing her child, but as a person who'd built her entire identity around being someone's caretaker, someone's protector. Without Sophia, Carol was just another refugee. With her daughter, she was a family unit worth protecting, worth including, worth saving. But that's not the whole truth either, and both of them know it. I think, Carol says carefully, transplanting another seedling with unnecessary precision, that maybe you needed her back too. Daryl doesn't answer immediately, but he doesn't deflect either. Because Carol has identified something that he's only beginning to understand about himself, that somewhere in the process of searching for Sophia, he'd stopped being a loner who happened to be traveling with a group and become someone who belonged to a family. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of approaching voices. Rick and Herschel returning from their morning walk around the property perimeter. But the interruption doesn't feel like an intrusion. It feels like the natural rhythm of a community, where people's lives are genuinely interconnected. "Daryl, Carol," Rick calls out. "Can you join us for a few minutes? We've got some things to discuss." The impromptu meeting takes place on Herschel's front porch, with coffee that Patricia has brewed and chairs arranged in a circle that includes everyone, adults and children both, because that's become their way now, making decisions together, including everyone whose life will be affected by the outcomes. "Herschel and I have been talking about winter preparations," Rick begins, "and about what it means for all of us to be here long term." Herschel nods, his expression more settled than it's been since they arrived. "I want to make this official. You're not guests anymore. You're residents. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." The announcement should feel like relief, and it does. But it also feels like responsibility, because accepting Herschel's offer means committing to more than just shared shelter. It means committing to building something together, something that can last. "What would that look like practically?" Laurie asks. "Expansion," Rick answers. "Fortification, sustainable food production, long-term planning for not just surviving, but thriving." Glenn pulls out a notebook where he's been sketching ideas. "I've been thinking about the barn. Now that it's cleared, we could convert it into workshops, storage, maybe even additional living space if we need it. And the perimeter," Shane adds, his voice carrying less of the aggressive edge it's had in recent weeks. "We could extend the fence line, create secure areas for cultivation and livestock." But it's Sophia who asks the question that gets to the heart of what they're really discussing. Are we talking about just making this place safer, or are we talking about making it home? The distinction she's drawn is profound. Safety is about defense, about keeping threats out. Home is about building something worth defending, creating a life that has meaning beyond mere survival. "Home," Carol says firmly, before anyone else can answer. "We're talking about home." The word seems to settle something for all of them, because home implies permanence, investment, the kind of emotional commitment that makes people willing to fight for more than just their individual survival. Over the next hour, they develop plans that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. Expansion of the vegetable gardens, construction of proper workshops for equipment maintenance, installation of rainwater collection systems, even tentative discussions about establishing contact with other survivor communities, not as desperate refugees seeking shelter, but as an established community capable of mutual aid and trade. But more than the practical planning, what emerges is a shared vision of what they're trying to build. Not just a fortress against the walker threat, but a place where children can grow up with some semblance of normalcy, where adults can pursue meaningful work beyond mere survival, where community bonds are strong enough to weather whatever challenges the future might bring. Sophia's observations about walker behavior inform their defensive planning in ways both subtle and significant. Her insights about seasonal activity patterns influence patrol schedules. Her understanding of how walkers respond to different types of distraction shapes their approach to perimeter security. But perhaps most importantly, her perspective as someone who survived by observation rather than aggression influences their overall philosophy. They're building defenses designed to redirect threats rather than simply destroy them, creating systems that prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term dominance. The conversation extends through lunch and into the afternoon, with people breaking off into smaller groups to discuss specific aspects of their evolving plans. Carl and Sophia collaborate on ideas for a communication system using the barn's loft space as an observation post. Dale and Herschel discuss mechanical projects that could improve their quality of life. Andrea and Glenn plan training schedules that will ensure everyone maintains the skills they've developed. By evening, what began as a simple announcement about winter preparations has evolved into something much larger, a comprehensive vision for their community's future that assumes not just survival, but growth and prosperity. As the sun sets over what they're all beginning to think of as their farm rather than Herschel's farm, Carol finds herself sitting on the porch steps beside Daryl, watching Sophia and Carl practice the hand signals they've developed for silent communication during potential danger. "You know what I realized today?" Carol says. "What's that?" "We're not the same people who arrived here 2 weeks ago." Daryl considers this, watching Sophia demonstrate proper crouch and freeze technique to Carl with the confident authority of someone who's earned the right to be taken seriously. "No," he agrees. "We're not." "Are you okay with who we've become?" It's a question that goes beyond simple satisfaction with their current circumstances. Carol is asking whether the people they've had to become in order to save Sophia, to clear the barn, to build this community, whether those people are people they can live with being. Daryl looks around at their evening scene. Rick and Herschel discussing security protocols with the easy collaboration of old partners. Glenn and Maggie planning garden expansions with the enthusiasm of people who believe in their future. Dale maintaining equipment with the methodical care of someone who expects to need it for years to come. "Yeah," he says finally. "I think I am." Because the ripple effects of Sophia's rescue have created something none of them expected when they first arrived at Herschel's farm as desperate refugees. They've created a community where everyone's expertise matters, where children are protected but also valued as contributors, where difficult decisions are made through collaboration rather than conflict. They've created a place where Daryl Dixon, who spent most of his life believing he was fundamentally unsuited for belonging to anything, has discovered that he's actually quite good at being part of a family, where Carol Pelletier, who spent years defining herself solely through her relationships to other people, has found her own voice and her own strength, where a 12-year-old girl named Sophia has transformed from victim to survivor to teacher, showing adults how observation and patience can be more powerful than aggression and fear. The changes ripple outward from the central miracle of Sophia's survival, touching every aspect of how they live together, plan together, and dream together about what their future might hold, as the first stars appear over their farm, their home, The group settles into evening routines that reflect their new understanding of who they are and what they're building together. They're not just survivors anymore. They're a community. They're a family. They're people who've learned that the best way to honor the miracle of a life saved is to build something worthy of that salvation. In The Walking Dead, hope isn't just about believing things will get better. It's about doing the work to make them better. And for the first time since the world ended, this group of people has both the hope and the means to do that work together. The ripple effects are just beginning. Chapter 10. The Test. There's a particular irony in how quickly we can become attached to our new normal. How quickly what once felt impossible starts to feel inevitable. In The Walking Dead, we've seen how communities can flourish in the spaces between crises, building routines and relationships and hope, only to discover that the world has other plans. But we've also seen how those periods of building can prepare people for challenges they never anticipated, how the bonds forged in peace can become the foundation for survival when peace ends. The community at Herschel's farm is about to discover which kind of story they're living. The morning starts like any other in their evolving routine. Carol tends the expanded gardens, while Sophia practices her morning observations from the barn's loft, now converted into an official watch post. Daryl and Glenn conduct their perimeter check, noting the seasonal changes that affect walker movement patterns. Rick and Herschel discuss supply priorities over Patricia's coffee, their conversation flowing with the easy collaboration of established partners. It's Sophia who spots them first. 3 people approaching from the southeast. Her voice crackles over the radio system they've rigged between the barn and the house. Moving slow, carrying packs, they look tired. The response is immediate, but not panicked. Because they've developed protocols for this situation, strangers approaching the farm, protocols that balance caution with the possibility that desperate people might genuinely need help. Rick reaches for his radio. "Can you see weapons?" One rifle visible, but it's not raised. They're walking in the open, not trying to hide. Keep watching them. Glenn, Daryl, positions. Within minutes, their community's defensive strategy unfolds with the smooth efficiency of something they've practiced but never had to use. Glenn takes overwatch from the farmhouse's second floor. Daryl moves to provide flanking support from behind the barn. Shane positions himself near the gate, ready to either welcome or deter the approaching strangers. Carol appears at Rick's side, and there's something new in her posture. Not the deferential seeking of protection that characterized her arrival here, but the confident stance of someone who expects to be included in important decisions. "What's the protocol?" she asks. "We talk to them, figure out what they want, what they're running from, whether they're a threat." "And if they need help?" Rick looks at her, recognizing that this isn't just a tactical question. Carol is asking about their community's values, about who they've decided to be in this new world. "Then we help them," he says, assuming we can do it safely. The 3 strangers stop at the farm's perimeter fence, a man in his 40s, a woman about the same age, and a teenager who stays close to the woman's side. They raise their hands in the universal gesture of peaceful approach, but Rick notices that all 3 of them are studying the farm's defenses with the careful attention of people who've learned to assess threats quickly. "Hello," the man calls out. "We're looking for a safe place to rest. We've got supplies to trade, and we're not asking for charity." Rick approaches the fence, staying just outside easy-grabbing range, with Shane flanking him at a tactical distance. It's a formation they've developed through their recent experience, close enough for conversation, far enough for safety. "Where are you coming from?" Rick asks. "Atlanta. Or what's left of it." The man's voice carries the particular exhaustion that comes from weeks of hard travel. "I'm David. This is my wife, Sarah, and our son, Michael. We've been on the road for 3 weeks, looking for somewhere stable." "What happened in Atlanta?" David and Sarah exchange glances, and Rick recognizes the look. People deciding how much truth to share. How much might make them seem dangerous rather than desperate. "The safe zones fell," Sarah says finally. "Military pulled out, left everyone who couldn't keep up. The dead took over everything south of the perimeter highway." It's plausible. Rick has been monitoring radio chatter when possible, and the reports from Atlanta have been increasingly grim. But plausible doesn't mean true, and believable doesn't mean safe. Through his radio, Sophia's voice provides tactical intelligence. "They've been watching our defenses for about 10 minutes. The teenager keeps looking at the barn, but not like he's afraid of it. Like he's evaluating it." The observation is subtle but significant. Most people approaching a farm would focus on the house, the obvious center of activity. Someone studying the barn suggests either tactical thinking or specific intelligence about their community's use of that building. Rick makes a decision that reflects their evolved approach to these situations. "We're willing to talk, but we need to know more about who you are and what you're hoping for here. Are you looking for a temporary stop or something longer term?" Honest answer. David steps closer to the fence. "We're hoping for somewhere we can contribute, somewhere that might become permanent. We've got skills. I was an engineer, Sarah's a nurse, Michael's good with electronics. We're not just looking for handouts." Carol speaks up from beside Rick, and her voice carries authority that surprises everyone, including herself. "What kind of nursing background?" "ER trauma, surgical assist, basic field medicine," Sarah responds. 10 years at Grady Memorial, before everything fell apart." The answer hits like a small revelation, because Herschel's veterinary training has been their only medical resource, and while he's competent, having someone with human trauma experience could dramatically improve their community's survival prospects. But it's also exactly the kind of skill set that someone might claim to have if they wanted to seem valuable to a community of survivors. Daryl's voice comes over the radio. "Rick, they've got a car hidden about half a mile back in the trees. Looks like they've been planning this approach for a while." The information changes the tactical picture significantly. People with transportation who choose to approach on foot are either being very careful or very deceptive. The question is, which one? Rick looks at Carol, recognizing that this is the moment where their community's values get tested against practical security concerns. Do they err on the side of caution or compassion? "Sophia," Carol says into her radio, "what's your assessment of their body language?" It's a remarkable question to ask a 12-year-old, but Sophia's recent experiences have taught everyone to value her observational skills. "The adults are nervous but not threatening," Sophia's response comes clearly. "They keep checking behind them, like they're worried about something following them. The teenager is trying to look calm, but he's scared. They seem like people who've been running from something, not people planning to hurt someone." Carol nods, then looks at Rick. "I think we should bring them in for a proper conversation, but controlled conditions." "The barn?" Rick asks, understanding immediately. The barn. What follows demonstrates how much their community has evolved since Sophia's rescue. Instead of the suspicious interrogation that might have characterized their early days, or the reckless acceptance of Shane's preferred direct approach, they conduct what amounts to a formal interview process. David, Sarah, and Michael are welcomed into the barn, now clearly a community space rather than a place of hidden dangers, where the entire group can participate in the conversation while maintaining security. Glenn continues Overwatch. Daryl monitors their hidden vehicle, but everyone else gathers around the improvised table, where Sophia now conducts her daily briefings. The questions are direct but not hostile. What skills do they have? What are they running from? What are they hoping to find? What can they contribute to a community that's already established its own rhythms and priorities? The answers paint a picture of people who've lost everything, but retain hope. David's engineering background could help with their expansion plans. Sarah's medical training addresses their most critical skill gap. Michael's electronics expertise could improve their communications and security systems. But more than their skills, what emerges is their understanding of what community requires. They're not just looking for protection. They're looking for a place where they can rebuild something that resembles civilization. We've seen groups that are just about taking what they need, Sarah says. And we've seen groups that fell apart because no one could agree on anything. We're hoping to find people who understand that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about having something worth staying alive for. Carol and Rick exchange glances, recognizing that Sarah has just articulated the philosophy their community has been developing without fully realizing it. The conversation continues for over an hour, covering everything from practical skills to personal histories to hopes for the future. By the end, what's emerged isn't just an interview, but a negotiation between people who understand what they're building and people who want to help build it. But it's Sophia who asks the question that cuts to the heart of the matter. If we let you stay, and then something bad happened, walkers, dangerous people, whatever, would you stay and fight with us, or would you leave to save yourselves? The question reveals how much this 12-year-old understands about community loyalty and the difference between temporary alliance and permanent commitment. David looks at his wife and son, then back at Sophia. We've been running for 3 weeks. We're tired of running. If you'll have us, we'd like to stop running and start building. That's not an answer, Sophia points out, with the directness that's become her trademark. Michael, the teenager, speaks up for the first time. She's right. We'd stay and fight. We don't have anywhere else to go, and we don't want anywhere else to go. This feels like a place worth defending. The answer satisfies Sophia, and somehow that settles the matter for everyone else. By evening, David, Sarah, and Michael have been integrated into the community's evening routines. Sarah assists Herschel with medical supply inventory. David discusses structural improvements with Glenn and Dale. Michael works with Carl and Sophia to improve their radio communication system. But the real test of their integration comes 3 days later, when a group of walkers, attracted by the sound of Michael's electronic experiments, approaches the farm in larger numbers than they've dealt with since the barn clearing. The response demonstrates how much their community has evolved. Instead of panic or rushed individual action, they implement coordinated protocols that make use of everyone's skills, including the newcomers. Sarah provides medical support from a secure position. David uses his engineering knowledge to help create barriers that redirect the walker herd rather than simply stopping them. Michael's communications improvements allow for real-time coordination between all positions, and Sophia's insights about walker behavior guide the entire operation, her observations from the barn loft allowing them to predict the herd's movements and plan accordingly. The threat is neutralized without anyone being injured, without any dramatic heroics, and without damage to their community's infrastructure. It's efficient, safe, and demonstrates that their approach to survival, cooperation, planning, inclusion of everyone's expertise, actually works under pressure. As the group cleans up after the incident, Carol finds herself standing beside the barn with Daryl, watching Sophia demonstrate radio protocols to Michael with the confidence of someone who knows her knowledge is valued. They fit, Carol observes. Yeah, they do. Think that's because we chose well, or because we've gotten better at making people fit? Daryl considers the question, watching David help Rick plan improvements to their perimeter defenses, while Sarah and Herschel discuss medical training for the entire group. Both, maybe. We know what we're looking for now, and we know how to make room for people who want to be part of something. The test has been passed. The community that emerged from Sophia's rescue, built on cooperation, inclusion, respect for everyone's contributions, and careful planning, has proven itself capable of growth, integration, and effective response to external threats. They're not just survivors anymore. They're a functioning community with the confidence to welcome new members and the strength to protect what they've built together. In The Walking Dead, the real victory isn't just staying alive. It's building something worth being alive for, and being strong enough to defend it when the world tries to take it away. The test is complete. The building continues. Chapter 11. Looking forward. There's something profoundly hopeful about making plans for a future you can't guarantee will exist. In The Walking Dead, we've seen how communities can be built and destroyed in a matter of days, how careful preparation can be undone by a single moment of bad luck or poor judgment. But we've also seen how the act of planning itself creates something valuable, not just practical readiness for challenges ahead, but a shared vision that binds people together and gives them something to work toward, beyond mere survival. The community at Herschel's farm is about to discover that hope, when properly channeled, can be as powerful a survival tool as any weapon or fortification. 3 weeks have passed since David, Sarah, and Michael joined their group, and the integration has exceeded everyone's expectations. But more than just adding capable hands to their community, the arrival of new members has prompted conversations about growth, expansion, and what it really means to build something sustainable in a world that seems determined to tear down everything people try to create. The morning finds Rick and Herschel standing in what was once a simple pasture, now marked with stakes and string that represent the foundation of their winter greenhouse project. It's an ambitious undertaking, a permanent structure that assumes they'll still be here next spring, and the spring after that, and the spring after that. Sarah thinks we can extend the growing season by at least 6 weeks with proper climate control, Herschel explains, gesturing toward the marked boundaries. Between that and the root cellar expansion, we should be able to achieve genuine food security by next autumn. Rick nods, but his attention is caught by something else, the sound of laughter coming from the barn, where Sophia is conducting what has become her daily training session for the community's younger members. Because that's what she's become, almost without anyone noticing. A teacher, passing on survival skills that she learned in the hardest possible way to people who might need those same skills someday. Through the barn's open doors, they can see Sophia working with Michael and Carl, using chalk on the barn wall to diagram walker movement patterns and safe navigation techniques. Her voice carries the confident authority of someone who knows her knowledge is valued and essential. The key is understanding their detection radius, Sophia explains, drawing overlapping circles to represent walker awareness zones. If you know how close you can get before they notice you, you can plan routes that keep you safe, even in areas where they're concentrated. Michael, despite being older than both Sophia and Carl, takes notes with the careful attention of someone who recognizes expertise regardless of its source. Because that's become one of their community's defining characteristics, the understanding that valuable knowledge can come from anyone, and wisdom often emerges from the most unexpected experiences. Carol appears beside Rick and Herschel, carrying a clipboard filled with inventory lists and planning documents. But more than that, she's carrying herself differently than she did when they first arrived at the farm. There's confidence in her posture, authority in her voice, and a sense of purpose that goes beyond just caring for Sophia. The supply allocation meetings are starting to feel like actual governance, she observes, and there's mild surprise in her voice, as if she's still getting used to the idea that her opinions matter in community decision-making. Is that a problem? Rick asks. No, it's just different. We're not just surviving day to day anymore. We're actually building something that might last. The distinction she's drawn captures something profound about their evolution as a community. They've moved beyond crisis management into long-term planning, beyond reactive survival into proactive development. They're not just trying to stay alive. They're trying to create a life worth living. Their conversation is interrupted by Daryl's approach from the perimeter patrol route he's been developing. But like everyone else, his role has evolved beyond its original parameters. He's still their primary scout and tracker, but he's also become something else, a trainer, a strategist, and, though he'd probably never use the word himself, a teacher. Got the new patrol schedule worked out, he reports, offering Carol a hand-drawn map marked with routes, timing, and contingency protocols. Michael's got some good ideas about communication systems that would let us cover more ground without splitting up so much. Carol accepts the map with the easy authority of someone who's become genuinely involved in community planning, because that's another way they've changed. Decisions aren't made by a single leader anymore, but through collaborative discussion that includes everyone whose life will be affected by the outcomes. What about the walker migration patterns? She asks. Sarah mentioned she's been tracking seasonal changes in their behavior. That's the smart part, Daryl replies, and there's approval in his voice. Instead of just avoiding them, we're learning to predict them. Means we can plan around their movements instead of just reacting to them. It's a subtle but significant shift in philosophy. Instead of treating walkers as unpredictable threats that require constant vigilance, they're learning to understand them as a predictable part of their environment that can be managed through knowledge and preparation. The conversation evolves naturally into their weekly planning meeting, held now in the barn's main space, with seating arranged in a circle that includes everyone, adults and children both. Because that's become their way, decisions that affect everyone are made by everyone. Glenn spreads engineering drawings across their improvised conference table. The expanded fence line should be completed before the first frost. We're talking about a secure perimeter that's 3 times our current size, with multiple checkpoints and fallback positions. Sarah adds medical considerations. I've been working with Herschel to establish a proper infirmary in the farmhouse basement, climate-controlled, equipped for surgery if necessary, stocked with enough supplies to handle major trauma. David contributes infrastructure planning. The water collection system is functional, but we need redundancy. I'm proposing a secondary reservoir that would give us 6 months of water independence. But it's Sophia who asks the question that puts all their planning into perspective. What happens if other people find us? Good people who need help, but also maybe people who aren't good? The question cuts to the heart of their long-term survival challenge. They're building something worth protecting. But making it worth protecting also makes it worth taking. Their success creates both security and vulnerability. Carol speaks first. We establish protocols, ways to evaluate people before they get close enough to threaten what we've built, ways to help people who genuinely need it without compromising our own safety. And if they're not good people? Carl asks, with the directness that children bring to difficult questions. Rick answers carefully. Then we defend what we've built. But we do it smart, not just with force. The conversation that follows demonstrates how much their thinking has evolved since those early days of desperate reactivity. They discuss early warning systems, graduated response protocols, and community defense strategies that prioritize protection without abandoning their values about helping people who need it. But more than tactical planning, what emerges is a comprehensive vision of what they're trying to create. Not just a fortress that keeps threats out, but a functioning community that creates value, supports growth, and maintains hope, even in the face of an uncertain future. As the meeting continues, individual contributions blend into collective planning. Michael proposes communication networks that could connect them with other survivor communities. Maggie suggests agricultural expansion that could support a much larger population. Dale outlines mechanical projects that could improve their quality of life and defensive capabilities. Each proposal builds on the others, creating a web of interconnected improvements that transform their individual survival strategies into community development plans. But perhaps most significantly, they begin establishing traditions and rituals that honor both what they've lost and what they've gained. A memorial garden for the barn walkers who were laid to rest, a weekly gathering where people share skills and knowledge, a formal process for welcoming new community members that includes both evaluation and integration support. As the sun sets over their expanding community, Sophia stands in the barn loft that was once her prison and is now her observation post, watching the people who've become her family move through evening routines that reflect their shared commitment to building something that might last. Below her, Carol and Daryl discuss security protocols with the easy collaboration of partners who've learned to trust each other's judgment completely. Rick and Herschel plan infrastructure improvements with the enthusiasm of people who believe in their future. Glenn and Sarah work on supply inventories with the careful attention of people who expect to need those supplies for years to come. "Mama," Sophia calls down to Carol, "can you come up here for a minute?" Carol climbs the ladder to the loft space where Sophia spends her observation time, finding her daughter looking out over the farm with an expression that combines satisfaction with anticipation. "What do you see when you look at all this?" Carol asks. Sophia considers the question seriously, studying the expanded gardens, the reinforced buildings, the people moving through their evening routines with the comfortable efficiency of an established community. "I see home," she says finally, "but not just a place to live. A place where people can grow things and learn things and be safe enough to dream about tomorrow." The observation captures something essential about what they've built together. They've created more than just survival. They've created the foundation for hope, growth, and genuine human flourishing. Carol looks out over the farm, their farm, and sees the same thing Sophia sees. A place where children can learn skills that will keep them alive, but also learn subjects that will keep them human, where adults can pursue meaningful work beyond mere survival, where community bonds are strong enough to weather whatever challenges the future might bring. "Are you happy here?" Carol asks. "Yes," Sophia answers without hesitation. "But more than that, I'm useful here. We all are." The distinction matters, because happiness in The Walking Dead isn't just about feeling good. It's about feeling valuable, needed, connected to something larger than individual survival. As the first stars appear over their community, Carol and Sophia sit together in the loft space that represents both the worst and best of their shared experience. The place where Sophia learned to survive, and where she learned that survival without purpose isn't really survival at all. Below them, their chosen family continues the work of building something that might last. Planning for winters they hope to see, preparing for challenges they can't anticipate, creating traditions that will outlive any individual member of their community. In The Walking Dead, looking forward isn't just about optimism, it's about commitment. The commitment to believe that the work of building community, protecting each other, and maintaining hope is worth doing even when you can't guarantee the results. They've learned that lesson through the hardest possible teacher, the near loss and miraculous return of someone they couldn't bear to lose. Now they're ready to build something worthy of that second chance. The future stretches ahead of them, uncertain but no longer frightening, because they've learned that whatever comes next, they'll face it together, with skills and bonds and hope forged through their shared experience of loss and recovery. Looking forward has never felt so much like coming home. Chapter 12. The New Normal. There are moments in history that seem small when they happen, but create ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. A crossbow lowered instead of raised. A gap in barn boards noticed instead of ignored. A decision to listen instead of assume. In The Walking Dead, we've seen how the smallest choices can reshape entire timelines, how a single moment of paying attention can be the difference between tragedy and miracle, between ending and beginning. 6 months have passed since Daryl Dixon heard a cough from inside Herschel's barn and made the decision to investigate instead of walking away. 6 months since that moment of curiosity and courage set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just one little girl's fate, but the destiny of everyone who would come to call this place home. The morning sun rises over what was once simply Herschel Green's farm, and is now something much more significant. The Sophia community, named not in honor of the girl they almost lost, but in celebration of the girl they found, and everything she taught them about survival, hope, and the power of seeing clearly what others might miss. Standing in the loft space that was once her prison and is now her teaching platform, Sophia Pelletier, no longer the frightened 12-year-old who hid among the dead, but a confident 13-year-old who's become one of the community's most valued instructors, addresses the newest group of arrivals with the calm authority of someone who's learned that knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. The most important thing to understand about survival, she tells the 8 people gathered below her in the barn, is that it's not about being stronger or faster or braver than the dangers around you. It's about being smarter. It's about paying attention to details that other people miss. Below her, the newest residents of their community, a family of 5 from Jacksonville, a couple from Savannah, and a lone teenager who walked here from as far away as Tennessee, take notes with the careful attention of people who understand that this knowledge could save their lives. But Sophia isn't just teaching walker behavior and survival tactics anymore. She's teaching something more fundamental, the philosophy that has come to define their community, the understanding that observation is more valuable than assumption, that collaboration achieves more than individual heroics, that building something worth protecting is more important than simply protecting what you have. Questions, she asks, and when the Jacksonville family's father raises his hand, she nods with the patient confidence of someone who's become genuinely good at this. How do you know when to trust new people? How do you balance helping others with protecting what you've built? It's a sophisticated question, and Sophia considers it seriously before answering. You watch them. Not just what they say, but how they move, how they treat people who can't help them, how they respond when they think no one is paying attention. And you remember that trust isn't something you give all at once. It's something that grows when people prove they deserve it. The answer comes from hard-earned experience, because the Sophia community has become something unprecedented in the post-apocalyptic landscape. A thriving settlement that regularly takes in new residents, not out of desperation for numbers, but from a genuine belief that the right people can make their community stronger. From her position in the barn loft, Sophia can see the evidence of that growth spread across the landscape below. The expanded gardens that now feed nearly 30 people, the workshop buildings where community members repair equipment, craft tools, and develop innovations that have attracted attention from other survivor groups across 3 states, the infirmary that Sarah has developed into a medical facility sophisticated enough to handle complex surgeries and trauma care. But most importantly, she can see the people, Carol and Daryl, working together to plan the day's patrol routes with the easy collaboration of partners who've learned to trust each other's judgment completely. Rick and Herschel, discussing expansion plans with a group of newcomers who've brought engineering and agricultural expertise. Glenn and Maggie, training teenagers in defensive tactics that prioritize de-escalation and intelligent positioning over aggressive confrontation. This is what has grown from that single moment 6 months ago when Daryl chose to investigate instead of ignore, when he decided to trust his instincts instead of accepting easy assumptions. A community of nearly 30 people who've learned that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about building something worth staying alive for. The transformation is perhaps most visible in the barn itself. The space that once held death now serves multiple functions: training facility, community meeting hall, workshop space, and memorial. Because they've never forgotten what this place once was, or what it cost to transform it into what it's become. In the corner where the most aggressive walkers once clustered stands a small memorial wall, photographs and mementos representing not just the barn walkers who were laid to rest, but all the people this community has lost along the way. But beside that wall of remembrance stands something else: the Cherokee Rose Garden that Carol and Sophia planted together. A living symbol of the idea that beauty can grow from the hardest ground, that hope can flourish even in places that once held only despair. As Sophia concludes her morning training session and the new arrivals disperse to begin their integration activities, she climbs down from the loft to find Carol waiting for her, with the afternoon schedule and a cup of the chicory coffee that's become one of their community's small luxuries. "How are they looking?" Carol asks, settling beside her daughter on the bench they've placed near the memorial wall. "Good. The family from Jacksonville has real farming experience, and the couple from Savannah knows about water systems. The teenager—" Sophia pauses, considering. "He's been alone for a long time. He's going to need more time to learn how to be part of something." Carol nods, recognizing the wisdom in Sophia's assessment. Because that's become one of their community's defining strengths: the ability to see not just what people can contribute immediately, but what they might become with time, support, and the right kind of encouragement. "Speaking of being part of something," Carol says, "Daryl wanted to talk to you about the delegation that's coming next week." Sophia's eyes light up with interest, because the Sophia community has become something they never expected, a model that other survivor groups want to learn from. Their approach to integration, their collaborative decision-making processes, their success at building sustainable growth, all of it has attracted attention from communities as far away as Virginia and South Carolina. Which group is it this time? The Richmond settlement. They've heard about our training programs and want to understand how we've managed to take in so many new people without losing our stability. It's a question they've been asked repeatedly over the past few months. How does a community grow from 8 desperate refugees to nearly 30 thriving residents without losing its identity or compromising its security? How do you balance openness with caution, growth with sustainability? The answer, they've learned, lies in the lessons that emerged from Sophia's rescue, the understanding that careful observation reveals more than aggressive action, that collaborative planning achieves better results than individual heroics, that building trust through shared experience creates stronger bonds than demanding loyalty through authority. But perhaps most importantly, they've learned that hope, real hope, not just wishful thinking, comes from proving to yourself and others that seemingly impossible things can actually be accomplished when people work together intelligently and persistently. As the afternoon progresses and the community settles into its established rhythms, Sophia finds herself walking the perimeter path that Daryl first established during those desperate days of searching for her. But now it's not a search route, it's a meditation path, a place where community members can think and plan and remember how far they've all come. At the eastern edge of their expanded territory stands a marker that's become one of their most important landmarks, a simple wooden sign that reads Sophia's Point, marking the spot where Daryl first noticed the unusual walker movement patterns that led him to investigate the barn. It's not a monument to heroism or dramatic rescue. It's a reminder of something more subtle and perhaps more important, the value of paying attention, of trusting your instincts, of investigating instead of assuming. Standing at that marker as the sun begins to set over their thriving community, Sophia reflects on the question that visitors always ask. How did this all happen? How did one 12-year-old survival story become the foundation for something so much larger? The answer, she's come to understand, isn't really about her survival at all. It's about what her survival taught everyone else about the power of observation, collaboration, and refusing to accept that the worst outcomes are inevitable. Daryl's decision to investigate unusual sounds instead of dismissing them. Glenn's willingness to share dangerous knowledge instead of keeping it secret. Carol's choice to trust in collective decision-making instead of demanding individual control. Herschel's gradual acceptance that growth requires letting go of comfortable illusions. Rick's leadership style that included everyone's expertise instead of relying on traditional authority structures. Each of those choices, made by people who were learning to see clearly and act wisely, created the foundation for everything that followed. The successful integration of new community members, the development of sustainable systems for food, defense, and governance, the creation of training programs that other communities now want to replicate. As the first stars appear over the Sophia community, the evening routines unfold with the comfortable efficiency of people who've learned to build their lives around shared purpose and mutual support. Children practice skills that will keep them alive, while also learning subjects that will keep them human. Adults pursue meaningful work that goes beyond mere survival, creating value and beauty and hope for everyone around them. In the barn, Daryl leads an evening discussion about patrol strategies with community members who've become genuine partners in keeping everyone safe. In the farmhouse, Sarah and Herschel review medical protocols with trainees who've come from other communities specifically to learn their innovative approaches to trauma care. In the workshop buildings, Glenn and several newcomers work on mechanical projects that will improve their quality of life and their capacity to help other survivor groups. And in the Cherokee Rose Garden, Carol and Sophia sit together among flowers that bloom in memory of loss, but celebration of survival, watching their chosen family move through routines that represent the triumph of hope over despair, community over isolation, intelligent planning over desperate reaction. Do you ever think about how different everything would be if Daryl hadn't heard you that day? Carol asks. Sophia considers the question seriously, imagining alternative timelines where her cough went unnoticed, where the barn walkers were discovered in some more violent way, where their group never learned the lessons that allowed them to build something lasting. "I think about it sometimes," she admits, "but then I remember that he did hear me, and Glenn did help with the rescue, and you did learn to speak up for what you believed was right, and everyone did choose to work together instead of falling apart." She pauses, watching Daryl and Rick emerge from the barn after their planning session, their conversation continuing with the easy flow of people who've learned to trust each other's judgment completely. Maybe the important thing isn't what could have happened differently. Maybe it's understanding that when people choose to pay attention to small details, when they choose to work together instead of against each other, when they choose to build something instead of just protecting what they have, maybe that's when miracles become possible. Carol nods, understanding that her daughter has just articulated the philosophy that has come to define their community and attract people from hundreds of miles away. The understanding that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about creating conditions where life can flourish, where hope can grow, where the future becomes something to work toward, rather than something to fear. In The Walking Dead, the new normal isn't about returning to the way things were before the world ended. It's about building something better than what existed before, using the lessons that only catastrophe can teach about what really matters and what's actually possible when people refuse to accept that tragedy is inevitable. As the lights in the Sophia community begin to dim for the night, 30 people settle into sleep with the confidence that comes from belonging to something larger than individual survival. They've learned that paying attention to small details can change everything. That courage doesn't require dramatic gestures. Sometimes it just requires the willingness to investigate instead of ignore, to listen instead of assume, to build instead of merely endure. The new normal they've created isn't perfect, and it's not guaranteed to last forever. But it's proof that even in the darkest times, even when the world seems determined to tear down everything people try to create, hope is always possible for those who choose to see clearly and act wisely and work together toward something worth building. Sometimes the most important revolutions begin with someone choosing to pay attention to a sound that others might ignore. Sometimes the future of human civilization depends on the decision to investigate instead of assume, to collaborate instead of compete, to build instead of merely survive. In the end, that's what the rescue of Sophia Pelletier really accomplished. Not just the saving of one life, but the demonstration that when people choose hope over despair, community over isolation, and intelligent action over reactive desperation, they can create something that seemed impossible just a few months before. The new normal is proof that miracles are always possible. You just have to be paying attention when they happen.